So this is text 26. If dirt dug up by a boar is available, on the day of the dark moon, one should smear this dirt on his body and then bathe in a flowing river. While bathing, one should chant the following mantra. Text 27. O Mother Earth, you were raised by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of a boar because of your desiring to have a place to stay. I pray you kindly vanquish all the reactions of my sinful life. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Text 28. Thereafter, one should perform his daily scriptural duties and then, with great attention, offer worship to the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and also to the altar, the sun, water, fire, and the spiritual master. Text 29. I'll read the Sanskrit because it's very beautiful. It's a direct prayer to the Supreme Lord. Namastubhyam Bhagavate Purushaya Mahiyase Sarvabhuta Nivasaya Vasudevaya Sakshine. O Supreme Personality of Godhead, greatest of all, who lives in everyone's heart and in whom everyone lives, O witness of everything, O Vasudev, supreme and all-pervading person, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Text 30. I offer my respectful obeisances unto you, the Supreme Person. Being very subtle, you are never visible to material eyes. You are the knower of the 24 elements, and you are the inaugurator of the Sankhya Yoga system. Purport. This is the only verse in this set of verses that Prabhupada writes, a very short purport, so we'll quickly read that. Chatur Vimshad Guna. The 24 elements are the 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether. The 3 subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego. The 10 senses, 5 for working and 5 for acquiring knowledge. The 5 sense objects and contaminated consciousness. These are the subject matter of Sankhya Yoga, which was inaugurated by Lord Kapila Dev. This Sankhya Yoga was again propounded by another Kapila, but he was an atheist and his system is not accepted as bona fide. So the story so far, this chapter is entitled, I forgot the name of the chapter, hold on one second here. The Payovrita worship. So this is the story so far is that Aditi, the mother of the demigods, I'm going to stop my screen share here. The mother of the demigods she's very morose because the condition of the demigods being defeated by the demons. There is always a war going on between the two forces in the cosmic universe. And so the mother of the demigods is morose because she sees that the condition of her sons, the demigods, is not very good, that they have been deprived of their territory, their ruling, essentially their lives. So in this morose condition, her husband, Kashyapa, who was in deep trance in meditation for a long time, he observes her condition as he comes out of his trance, and he asks her the reason for why she's so morose and why the state of his ashram is so morose. And so she tells him the state of her heart, and she explains, Aditi, the mother of the demigods, she explains to her husband how she would love for her children to be restored to their formal glory. And so in the process, Kashyapa Muni, the great sage that he is, tries to explain to his wife that, the conditions of the material world go up and down, and we are experiencing some of it now around us. And then he essentially instructs her on the science of devotional service, and asks her to be detached from the conditions around her, and just apply herself to worshiping the Supreme Lord. But then she's honest, and she tells Kashyapa that I can't do it. I am sorry I can't do it. I don't understand. And I'm very deeply suffering the conditions of my own children. And so please tell me something here that will help me alleviate their condition. And so he takes, he feels, he really understands her pain, and he feels empathic towards her. And so he instructs her on a specific kind of sacrifice called Payovrata, which is meant to please the Supreme Lord. And he tells her that the only way that she will be able to restore her children's former glory and give them back what's rightfully theirs is by only the Supreme Lord will be able to fulfill her desires. So then he goes on to instruct her in the entire process of this specific kind of sacrifice called Payovrata. Now, what does Payovrata mean? Anyone would love to? I love an interactive class if that's all right. So anyone can unmute or use the chat and just say what Payovrata is. My hope is that in the interaction we will actually be able to dig deeper into the verses, so that more can come out. So, and that way we are also active participants in the conversation. So what does Payovrata mean? Anyone? Paya in Sanskrit stands for milk. And so Payovrata is essentially a milk sacrifice. We'll talk more about the word vrata. But the idea here is that Kashyapa, who is the son of Brahma, he says he is actually instructing on the specific kind of vrata or sacrifice that you sustain only on milk for 12 days. and then you offer specific prayers during those 12 days. So Payo means milk, and vrata means a sacrifice or a vow where you will just subsist on milk. So in today's set of verses, Kashyapa is instructing Aditi on how she should execute the sacrifice. And the verses, as you read the verses, they seem pretty odd, because the first verse starts with digging out the dirt from that has been dug, or taking the dirt that has been dug out by a boar, and then applying it to one's body. So why does the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a scripture that is directly meant for worshipping the Supreme Lord and glorification of the Supreme Lord and his devotees, why does the Srimad Bhagavatam talk about these kinds of vratas? Any thoughts?
Hare Krishna. I have
Hare Krishna. Yes, Tia.
My thought is that the Bhagavatam speaks of this because eventually it should lead to devotional service. So it's just kind of like a stepping stone to devotional service.
Very good. It is definitely, it is directly connected to the appearance of the Lord, right? So in this case, we will see very soon, Vamanadev, the incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead will see his advent, his coming. So it is connected to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Gaurakumar Prabhu wrote in the chat, to increase our remembrance of Krishna. Yes, definitely. Very good. What else? The Bhagavatam works on several levels. So, of course, it won't describe anything that is not directly connected to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we see the build-up going towards the Supreme Lord. And then the Srimad Bhagavatam also is bringing forth a culture, an ancient culture that's ultimately meant for the liberation of all living entities, and specifically in glorification of devotional service. But in the process of explaining the culture, it also does a lot of comparative analysis. Jagdishwar Nimai Prabhu was saying, it's a detailed glorification of the Lord's pastimes. Again, absolutely, yes. And then you also see here that the details of the vrata, the details of the sacrifice are being described. So what is the meaning of the word vrata? There are at least two places in the Bhagavad Gita where this word vrata shows up. Fasting, yes, that's one form of vrata. What else? What else does a vrata mean?
Vow.
Wow, very good, excellent. It has its origins in the Sanskrit root vra, which means to will or to choose, and there is a certain strength to that choice. You are making a vow. You're making a choice to do something. Right? It's a very strong intention. And before executing a vrata, you actually recite something specific in Sanskrit called a sankalpa. And a sankalpa essentially means you declare your intention for the vrata. It's like you kind of put it in the universe. You cosmically declare what you're about to do before you enter into a vrata. This is a very serious practice. And devotees, and the reason why I thought this topic was apropos is because next week, starting Sunday, we embark on, according to the lunar calendar, we enter the month of Kartik, and during the month of Kartik, as practitioners of devotional service, devotees typically undertake a vrata for the month of Kartik. They undertake a vow, a specific vow that is pleasing to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That I've lots of devotees will actually say no sweets for a month, no milk sweets for a month. There are different kinds of vows. No, very little Netflix. That's a good one too. So specifically for the month of Kartik, there are vratas that we undertake that enhances the practice of our devotional service, because in the month of Kartik, it's explained that anything that we do is magnified 1,000 times, because Kartik is also called the month of Srimati Radharani, and she has the natural desire to glorify and magnify whatever little we do in our devotional service. So so I felt that it would be very helpful for us to understand the consciousness behind a vrata, a consciousness behind 1 hour of Netflix during Kartik is 1,000 hours. Everything gets magnified. It's true. So what is the consciousness behind a vrata? So in this case, you'll see that when we read the verses here, verse 26 talks about how smearing the dirt dug out by a boar, which seems very odd, and especially the society that we are living in. When we read that verse, it's like, that's pretty gross. Right. But why does the vrata start with something like that? Because every vrata ultimately is meant to at least do two things. One is it's actually meant to it's meant to curb the constant urges of the ego. And you will see, even in these sets of verses, Aditi talks about being purified from sinful reactions. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, this is one of the places in the Gita that the word vrata comes up. Does anyone know which verse I'm going to talk about? It's a famous verse. Prabhupada quotes it very often. Okay, it ends. I'll give you a clue here. It ends with the words Dhrida Bhagavad Gita 9:25. I don't remember the verse, the verse number. Yes, that's right. Esham tva antagatam papam.
7.28.
What's that?
7.28.
Yeah, 728. Okay, good. I thought it was in chapter 7. There is another verse, Gaurakumar Prabhu is saying, Yanti deva vritan devan, prutran yanti prutavrataha, bhutani yanti bhuteja, yanti mad yajino apimam. That's right. There is another word, vrita, there too. Yanti deva vrita devan. So Krishna first in 728 talks about Esham tva antagatam papam jananam punyakarmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta bhajante mam dradavrataha. Says that when once yesham tava antagatam papam, when once past sins have been destroyed, jananam punya karmanam, by the performance of lots of pious activities, te dvandva moha nirmukta, they become free from dualities and desires, and then he says bhajante mam dradavrataha, then they are able to worship me with dradavrata, with a strong vow. It's like dradavrata, unshakable. It's like, my mind is just so fixed in the performance of the vrata. Right? So the one thing that Krishna is saying here is that that one can perform devotional service very, very strongly with mind, one single-pointed mind, when one's sins are destroyed, when one's because it is the desires of the ego that actually comes in the way of our devotional service. What to speak about our determination to perform devotional service, right? Devotional service, especially in the conditioned stage of life, requires a certain amount of determination. And we see, even as we sit down to chant our rounds in the morning, it's a vrata. We take a vow for 2 hours to sit down and chant our rounds, and we see how turbulent the mind is, how many different places it goes to. Right. So the ego is constantly desiring something, and so when we perform vratas, the primary purpose of a vrata is to basically tell the ego, listen, you're not going to get what you want for some time. Right? And in that process, the ego learns. It's kind of like taming the beast. You learn how to calm it down, and in the process, you reduce the constant demands of the ego. Then that hopefully gives us the space to perform devotional service. But that's not the only. So that's the primary reason for a vrata, especially as devotees when we take up vratas. That's the primary reason for a vrata. As practitioners, why we take a vrata is so that we can tell the ego, here is your boundary, you don't come out of this. Or I'm not going to give you this. And that creates the space and hopefully the mental determination to execute devotional service. Ultimately, that vrata is pleasing to Krishna because it's done in the service of devotional service. That's the idea. And when we take the vratas of initiation, the vows of initiation are very substantial. Those are not vratas for a month. Those are not vratas for a few hours. Those are vratas for our entire life. Right? We take the vows of following the 4 regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds every day. Those vratas are essentially, and this is where it's very important to understand vratas, certain kinds of vratas from certain other kinds of vratas, certain vows from certain other kinds of vows. And Krishna in the Gita also talks about the vows that he says in chapter 16, the divine and demoniac natures. He says, Kamam ashrita dushpuram, dambamana madanvita, mohat grahit vasad grahan, pravartante ashuchi vrataha. So he talks about, and I'm just going to read the translation. He says, the demoniac, taking shelter of insatiable lust, pride, and false prestige, and being thus illusioned, are always sworn to unclean work. So he says that the demoniac also make vratas. They also take vows. but their vows are displeasing to the Supreme Lord. He says their vows are, they're sworn to unclean activities. Those are vratas that are actually in support of the false ego. Right? You see vratas that are, and the specific words that are used here is damba mana madanvita. This very, very specific words. Damba mana is vratas that increase false pride, vows that increase false pride. And we see so many challenges on Facebook, right? We see, you know, always there is a hashtag, you know, 14-day challenge, 21-day challenge. Those are, in some ways, those are like forms of vratas. But what's important in a vrata is that and in the right kind of vrata doesn't necessarily increase it doesn't increase the demands of the false ego. There's some sort of taming to it, right? And the opposite, the other extreme, then what Krishna is talking about in the Gita about the demons is they take vratas too. We see in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we see Hiranyakashipu executing vratas, and it's severe, it's powerful, there's a lot of determination around it. But those vratas are not necessarily, they definitely don't please the Supreme Lord. Those vratas are called damba yagyas or damba vratas. Vratas, vows that increase the false prestige. Right? And those vratas are more exciting for the ego. Because ultimately the ego says, okay, I can sacrifice so that I can get more later on. Like we know what that feels like. Right? We get some sort of gain at the end. It's a question here. Just the thought of a long-term vrata vow is very intimidating. How do we commit ourselves? We'll come to that in a second. That's why I was saying it's intimidating because the ego, vratas that are in service of the ego recognizes, you know what, I have to give up something in the short term, but I'll get a lot more in the long term. Right? And those vratas are specifically called damba yagyas. They're false because they don't execute the basic purpose of a vrata. The basic purpose of a vrata is to curb the influence of the false ego, hopefully so that over time, the false ego actually dies. Which is why, and this is the point that we're coming to, which is why certain vratas are very intimidating. Because by taking those vows, we are essentially making a declaration of war against the false ego. It's very confronting to the false ego. And sometimes the false ego will say, you know, okay, I'll see how long you can do this. You know, soon enough, you know, you're going to realize that it's going to be hard. But it is intimidating for the false ego, especially when we take vows of initiation. When we sit in front of the fire and we offer the grains into the fire. And we say, never again, right? Like strictly following the 4 regulative principles. No meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling. And to at least chant 16 rounds of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra every day on my beads, attentively. That's a vow. That's a lifelong vow. And it's very intimidating for the false ego because the false ego recognizes that this is a vow undertaken for its demise. And so we are naturally going to experience challenges because the false ego is not going to let go so soon. Right? Just like here, it's interesting when Aditi undertakes this prata, the reason why it's recommended that she smear her body with dirt dug out by the boar is in this specific vrata. Again, every vrata that's executed for the progress of spiritual life will have some elements that will destroy the bodily conception of life, that actually make the bodily conception of life smaller. And in this case, someone like Aditi, in the body of a woman, right? It's very gross to actually put dirt on the body. There is physically, there is a sense of like, I have to, you get that twinge, it's cringeworthy. And that cringing is again, it's effective because that's the cringe coming from the false ego. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like to sit. We experience this every morning when we sit down to chant 16 rounds. And there are always excuses. I find myself wanting to procrastinate my chanting and put, I delay it as much as possible, and then finally I have to do it, right? Until I really have to do it, I'll procrastinate. Because the false ego has a cringe. It's cringing. It doesn't like it, right? But that is the strength. We derive strength by doing certain, even as they may seem to appear ritualistic, there is a certain sense of strength. That's right. Seems like if we think I can do this, there is pride. That's very true. What's and Rukmini is saying, it can be a fine line of what kills the ego and what helps the ego. Sometimes when I think of vows of initiation, I can also see how those vows can increase my false ego if taken with the wrong purpose. Exactly, right? So by definition, these vows are meant to destroy the false ego. And when we take these vows from a place of the false ego, we'll see we will be humbled. We'll fall on our face. It happens. And what she also, and it's interesting to see Aditi's frame of mind. She is actually asking Mother Earth to give her the strength to execute on these vows. There is a certain mood of humility. That's right. If we think only with the grace of Guru and Krishna, and not just think, we have to feel it. Right? So it's a very fine line. It's when we take the vows, we are actually putting our intention. We are making a declaration. And then we also are recognizing that through my own will, through my own strength, I don't know if I will be able to execute on this. Therefore, I need help. And so every vow, every sankalpa, as we put out our intention, is also followed by prayers. And we see Aditi does this. She prays to the earth, she prays to the altar, she prays to the sun, the moon, right? So she is offering prayers, and these prayers are a part of purification, but they're also asking for strength to execute the vow so that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is pleased. Right? So the commitment to, there was the earlier question here about how do we commit ourselves to the long-term vows. From our side, what's important is that we give our best. So when we take a vow, our sincerity is tested. Right? How desirous are we of the battle with the false ego? Now, when we take a vow, especially the vows of initiation, Prabhupada used to say, right, when you become a devotee, you're actually declaring war against Maya. It's not a small thing. And soon enough, we will be tempted in many different ways. Maya is very strong. She wears us down with time. I mean, she's working day and night, right? And her whole thing is she is incredibly patient. She is a master at this. So when we take those vows, what we also need are blessings and strength from the Supreme Lord and the devotees. That's what we rely upon, not just our own strength. Yes, we have to show up to fight every day. And what is important about sadhana bhakti is that even before we develop taste, for a process like chanting. What is important about sadhana bhakti is that we develop a taste for the struggle. We have to develop a taste for the struggle. We show up every day so that we struggle to please the Supreme Lord. And that struggle is pleasing to Krishna. Right? It's like seeing the attempt of someone who's conditioned to really break free so that Krishna can be served peacefully. That is pleasing to Krishna. We have to develop a taste for that struggle. And that's what gives the strength to continue the struggle every day. That's what gives the strength to commit to a long-term vow. It's not necessarily the fulfillment of the vow every day. We will fail. But it's the spirit that we show up with. And that spirit is so important, because without that spirit, everything is lost. And that spirit is not based on pride. That spirit is not based on proving anything. That spirit is just meant to please Krishna. Krishna, if my struggling every day is pleasing to you, then I will. Right? Garshan Prabhu said, by definition, unsteady devotional service, which is where most people begin with, keeping vows becomes difficult. Is it not a growing pain to come from a place of ego and get purified through the process and honestly feel dependence of Guru and Krishna? Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? So it's a very fine balance. The vows that we take, sometimes you're afraid to take vows because then we feel like, wow, if I fail, then what does it mean? And that's a very healthy fear to have. But again, that fear should not prevent us from taking the vow. But how we take the vow is important. We have to have a fighter spirit, and then simultaneously we have to have complete dependence on Krishna. That's Arjuna in the battlefield. Right? What Arjuna brought to the battlefield was not the result of victory, but Arjuna brought the fighting spirit. Right? And every day we fight. Every day we get up and we fight. And we remember, we recollect the time when we took the vow and we sit down to chant. And that's why initiation ceremonies are so inspiring, because you see, there is strength when we take a vow. Right? There is also intimidation, because the false ego will rebel. Why are the moments when we read about the Kurukshetra war, when there is the blowing of the conch shell, those are very powerful moments. Why? Because there is something simultaneously inspiring and simultaneously intimidating about it. And that's our spiritual life. That's why we are spiritual warriors. Coining Bhakti Tirtha Swami's term. It's that spirit every day. We experience that spirit. We fight. And it's simultaneously inspiring and intimidating. What if I fail? That fear will be there, but that's what courage is. And that's the spirit that we want in our spiritual life. And that's why these vratas are important. And if we take these vratas from any other place, from a place of wanting prestige, wanting to be accepted by a community, by a certain, wanting to belong, and all those things will be there naturally. And especially, I'm talking with regard to initiation, all these things will naturally be there. But the most important thing behind the vows of initiation is that by living this life, striving and struggling to live this life is going to be pleasing to Guru and Krishna. And through my own strength, I may not be able to do it. And therefore, I constantly depend on the blessings of the Vaishnavas and on the mercy of the Supreme Lord. And it is in that space, and Sachinandan Maharaj beautifully calls it, he calls it the liminal space. It's the space of tension. And that's what we enter into every day when we have to execute on our vows. We experience that tension of the false ego and the soul. It's a war between those two happening right there. And we enter into that space. It is in that space, when we enter into that space with grace and invite Krishna's mercy and the blessings of Vaishnavas into that space, we will see over time the separation of the false ego from the soul. It will happen in our lifetime. We will begin to experience it. Right? So that is the basic purpose of a vrata, is to see that separation between the false ego and the soul, so that ultimately the soul can be engaged in its constitutional position, which is to serve Krishna. So keeping this in mind as we go into Kartik, and I know different devotees are thinking about different vows, let's think about vows that will take us to that liminal space, that there will be stretch, that we will be asked to fight every day. And while there will be that intimidation of, well, what if I can't execute? Right? Of course, let us not make it so difficult for ourselves that we will not be able to reach it any day. But let there be a stretch. And let's go into that liminal space. Practice the struggle. Practice developing taste for that struggle. And we will, in time, experience the separation between the soul and the false ego in the service of Krishna. So I'd like to stop there and ask for any questions or comments, anything that devotees would like to share.
Thank you,
Roshan Prabhu, you have a thought here.
Especially, I love the point when you said like defining sadhana bhakti as actually developing taste for that struggle, because Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita where like, if this thing you do for developing desire to attain me, like, so it was like very aptly put in a different way, which is very inspiring to keep it up. Like as a struggle, yeah, it's a struggle, but at least let me develop a taste for the struggle and just be there present every day. So thank you so much.
Ravindra Sur Prabhu says something in one of his lectures. He says, life is a struggle. Right? The only choice we have is whether it's struggle with meaning or struggle without meaning. Right? And when we struggle for the sake of just maintaining the false ego, at the end, all of it is taken away. And it's still a struggle. Right? So why not struggle in the other direction? And that's the taste that we need to develop for that struggle, and free ourselves from the false ego.
Yes, by hearing from devotees like you, the struggle becomes, we can actually feel the inspiration to develop a taste for the struggle. Thank you for giving that inspiration. I would like to invite like other devotees to add any comments or questions that you would like to ask at this point of time.
I had a question. I don't know if we have time for it, but thank you so much, Rasanath. You're always very apt at just the kind of walking the nuances of spiritual life and bringing them out for us in a very real way. You mentioned Ravindra Prabhu, and I was thinking of another quote that he gave from a seminar long ago, The Cure of Souls, where he said, it's a fact that many more people are and will be attracted to the principles of Krishna consciousness than are able to follow them.
Yes.
And so you mentioned initiations being very inspiring. Something that comes up for me, and I don't know if I should be thinking this way or not, but oftentimes I think when an initiation ceremony, I wonder like, wow, are there people who are feeling, it could also be, you mentioned the word intimidating, or feeling left out. Like, oh, we celebrate people who can carry these vows and who achieve certain like accolades in spiritual life. And it's almost like, I think many people might feel, oh, if I don't reach this platform, if I'm not performing at a certain level, then I'm not accepted. or I'm not in, or I'm not like, in the inner circle of what it might be. And so it actually can sometimes create this divide of like the in people, the out people. It's like, and people feel like they're spectators in spiritual life, or they're kind of like the outsiders, and so how do we create space where, because that's another name, my understanding is also a name for Maya is to count, and so we're counting, okay, these people are performing at this level, therefore they're in, or something like that. So how do we create space for everybody to feel part of a family and welcome, despite an ability or inability to perform certain vows?
Thank you. It's a very good question. It's something that we have been thinking about for years and years now, and scratching our head to see what the right. I wouldn't even say way. Do we have some time, Karshan Prabhu, or is it? Yeah. Okay.
The darshan will be available through the Bhakti Center host screen. Okay. So those who want to take darshan can take, and you can go on. No problem.
Yeah. Sorry, that's not a 30-second answer. So
yeah, it's a very practical question. The challenge of always maintaining a standard, it's a very tricky. I think we as devotees and what we are really aspiring for puts us in a very tricky place. On one level, the standards are high. And the reason, and as you said, and as Ravindra Sri Prabhu says, the reason why people are attracted is the standard. Right? And then you have the other side, that when you have to feel that you fully belong, then you have to, then it's a stretch. So how do we preserve the standard, and at the same time constantly encourage individuals to keep striving towards that standard? It takes care. It takes personal care, and it actually takes a sense of belonging. So if we are constantly giving the message, if you are not getting initiated, Shashi Radha Muralidhar, Shashi Gaurav Chandra, I miss them so much. It's been so hard not to be able to take darshan personally. Thank you, Kumar Prabhu. So if we are subtly and not so subtly giving the message that unless you get here, you don't belong, then we will also see that people will take initiation because that's the only way they can feel that they belong. And then it becomes a way of socializing rather than its true spirit, which is Krishna, I want to give my life to you. It becomes a way of getting a new name than what it really stands for. So what we have to do is actually very thoughtfully, and it's not an easy thing at all. So what happens is in a Kanishta culture, the message will be, hey, if you're not getting initiated, you don't belong. In a Madhyama culture, the message will be very different. It's you belong no matter what. And then we always are striving to actually come closer to Krishna. The Krishna has accepted you no matter what. Right? And then how do we continue furthering pleasing Krishna is what we are looking at. And the initiation marks a very specific milestone in the life of a devotee. And then we are always creating an environment where people can gradually, at their own pace, go towards the milestone, but they never for a moment actually feel that they don't belong. Because that's not what for Krishna, as soon as somebody takes a step, they belong to Krishna. So it takes finesse, it takes intelligence, and it takes maturity to be able to hold the standard, and then also gradually encourage people to work towards it. Rasanath Swami said something once to me about outreach work that till date has formed the basis. He said that we look at a living entity not from a point of view of one lifetime, but we look at a living entity from a point of view of several lifetimes. And whatever we can do to support a living entity's progress towards Krishna, we do. So it's not a count. It's not a. It's doing exactly what is necessary to continue supporting and encouraging the living entity to make as much progress in one lifetime as possible. And that takes some. That takes some maturity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I also think it takes customized approach. It takes working with a specific individual to design it. That's why personal care, there is no substitute for personal care in spiritual life.